So certainly there's a question of what mysticism is. If we try to ask whether the Gelassenheit or the releasement or what, however you want to understand it, letting be, is something like equivalent to a kind of quote unquote awakening, a mystical awakening, or depending on how you want to understand that. So, of course, if we go to the Islamic tradition, or if we go to the Jewish tradition, and then we find out what mysticism is about, and we're going to get somewhat different answers. And Heidegger comes out of the Catholic tradition, and in the Catholic tradition, mysticism has a decidedly negative, shadowy existence, and it's in a certain way it's tolerated, but it's suppressed. And I would say there's so if you think of Catholicism and Zizek are more on one side, and Hegel, rational is the real, the attempt to the rational God. Yes, Thomas will tell you, Aquinas will tell you, we have an enigma. God is mysterious, and then we only get some broken reflection in our limited human intelligibility. We can't quite get there, maybe. And then you come into Newman and Cardinal Newman with his evolution of dogma. Why? Because we still can't get there. We're still trying to get there. Zizek is still trying to get there. Habermas is still trying to get there, and so on. But basically, I say it's not that we're thinking of like a yin-yang situation where there's no day without night, no night without day. It's rather there's an attempt to suppress one side and to let the other side become perfected and full and come into its fullness, to fulfill itself. Surely in the Jewish tradition this is much different. You have always the sense that the mystical tradition is somehow working together with the more explicit spelling out of the Mishnahs of the law. Is the Islamic tradition? It's certainly there's never. In fact, there's tends more towards this suppression of the rational side. I would say, so far as I know. I mean, of course, there's a very well developed Sharia law and so on, which is on the face of it rational, but of course it's derived from the received that would it's not derived from human reason alone, but rather from reception of prophetic reception. So we have a special case in the Western case, and yes, Heidegger in the case and in the Germans in particular, in contradistinction to the other Christian groups, have perhaps a greater have been more receptive to their mystics. Of course, Meister Eckhart, of course, but a number of others. And Heidegger, for instance, quotes very approvingly Angelius Celsius to say the flower has no why, no reason. It blooms because it blooms. This is for Heidegger. This is a pure vision. This is almost identical. He says this is almost the purest form of thinking, and I believe that he identifies this also with the poets, with the Holderlin and so on. So one can say in Heidegger, Heidegger sets the poets and the mystics on one side, and they're able to see past the calculative projects which give rise to the different forms of the question. The basic question of causality, you could say, with the Greeks is understood this way in Heidegger. The question why is the ursprung of all understanding of causality, of causal questions, of cause and effect. We ask why. Why did something happen? Why the wind? Why the harsh weather? Why don't I have enough money in my bank account? Whatever it is. And then you go and, depending on Aristotle or Plato, give different answers to how these why questions stretch up to what is that thing up there, the moon? What is the how does the earth go on, and all the different questions. The why questions give rise to different forms of answers to what causality is, which, according to Heidegger, following to some extent Schopenhauer, says finally Leibniz comes out with the fourth law of thought, the law of sufficient reason, after 2,200 years or so. Heidegger puts mystics and poets on one side as the pure thinkers, a pure vision, reminding of a very powerful phenomenology, and then on the other side he puts philosophy as I suppose as Nietzsche and the calculative thinking, and then there's a break in between, and this is again this Dasein of the where he's bringing in the antagonism, which has to be within itself, and in this way he understands himself as not doing either mysticism or rationalism, but doing something different. Now, how that looks from the Islamic tradition, how that looks from the students of Jewish mysticism, I couldn't say. That would be a different question. How that looks from the Chinese perspective of the Taoists and so on, I don't know. But Heidegger understands himself as doing something that's specific to the dispensation which comes out of the Greek beginning, especially from, I think he puts more weight on Anaximander than Thales, although he usually said that Thales is a teacher of Anaximander, but in any case, that we don't need to go into that here. Thinking of it, I think of it from Strauss's point of view of the citizen's understanding. When we think, so far as we would understand the uselessness, the useless mindfulness in Straussian as like a sort of something approaching mysticism, but in this case rather approaching Dasein and being, which Heidegger understands differently than the mystical tradition, so far as I can see on this. First, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe we could think about it further the more we learn. But I think of from the citizen's understanding, what uselessness really means is something that it doesn't give any benefit to the community from the start. It's like you're not diverting some water that will come over here that we can all use. You're not promoting anything that seems to be of general use to the community. And then one thinks of, I think of Heidegger's lectures, the 4-lecture series, which Agamben participated in as a young man, where Heidegger emphasizes that we should avoid publicness. And there's something in the useless mindfulness has to do with avoiding the publicness. And the publicness reminds of Kant's project, because Kant and Hegel, the ultimate rationalist, publicness for Kant is contrasted with any, the privateness is the limited pursuits of groups within the society, and possibly even, if we think in a sinister way, of the fraternities for the sake of exploiting the non-brothers in a capitalist society. But Heidegger doesn't contrast the publicness, I believe, with the privateness, with the mercenary ends of the secret societies or the fraternities, or the limited groups, you could say also of corporations, let's say, limited groups only for the stockholders. or only for whoever is regarded as a stakeholder, and so on. But Heidegger doesn't make the public private contrast in this way, because the public in that sense would be on for the rational good of the whole, for the public good. But he makes the distinction in a different way, which tends towards this something. It's almost it gives us to the cusp of a negation of rationality, but again, we're trying to point towards the Dasein split, towards the antagonism within itself of these two tendencies, and therefore you would think that the non-useful or the non-practical, but I guess we should cap it with this. Whenever we think of the practical, we're actually already thinking of the rational or the good, because if we do something that's harmful, we don't regard that as practical. One can confuse the practical with any action whatsoever, with any physical action. Oh, it's practical because it's physical, because it's palpable. But if you throw your wallet into the ocean or something, it's like that's not a practical act because it harms you, because then you have to go get all your ID cards again, and it's a big pain, and that's not a practical act. The practical, we assume in the practical that it's something good. We assume in the useful something good. So we assume the what then is understood as the value content under the fact-value distinction in the idea of the useful. Casting all this off seems to be part of the useless mindfulness.